Welcome, everyone. You're listening to In the Crosshairs, and I'm your host, Raquel Okyai, and I have a very special guest today. I'm so excited to have you on, Matt. My guest is a representative from Florida, Matt Caldwell, and he is running for agricultural commissioner this election from the state of Florida. So I'm very happy to have you on.
Glad to be on. Excited to talk today.
Excellent. So the first thing I want to ask you is, I wonder if you can give us just a little bit of background about yourself. You've been in office several terms now?
Absolutely. So I've been in the House the last 8 years, chaired the Ag and Natural Resource Subcommittee, and then for the last 4 years, the full committee above it. So not only Ag and Natural Resource issues, but transportation, pensions, elections, federal government, local government, and military affairs. A pretty diverse portfolio of issues.
How many terms have you served?
4 terms, so a total of 8 years. I got elected in 2010. It was really a fascinating race. You know, I was not the favorite in that race. I got outspent about 7-1. I raised $18,000, which is not much in a House primary. But I went out and knocked on 4,500 doors myself personally, and knew that if I talked to the folks that vote every time, you know, they were going to be the ones to make their mind up. And ultimately they did, and sent me to Tallahassee. And I went to work on the issues I told people I was passionate about, wanted to solve.
Sounds very grassroots. That's the way to win. You really have to go, you got to do the, you know.
That is exactly right.
People really appreciate the one-on-one contact with the person they want to vote for. So I think that's excellent. Are you doing the same thing this time around, running for commissioner?
Well, obviously, Commissioner of Agriculture is a statewide office, so it's a little harder for the candidate to get out and knock on doors. You know, in that House race, you're talking about 10,000 primary voters. In this race, for a statewide, it's about 1.5 million. Primary voters. So it's not door knocking for me, but instead it's getting out on the road and really campaigning for real. And we have done that. Through the end of July, we're at over 82,000 miles. We've traveled across the state. We've made a commitment to go to every corner once a month, and we've kept that commitment, going to Pensacola, Jacksonville, Miami, and then back home. I'm based out of Fort Myers. And making sure we get to every corner every single month, and we've done that for the entirety of the campaign.
So tell me a little bit about your background. Are you a native Floridian?
We are. My mom's side of the family actually homesteaded in Micanopy in 1826, and so we're coming up. It is a very cool story, coming up on 200 years, and that's mostly that area, Alachua, Marion, Madison County as well, is where my ancestors are from. And then we moved to Fort Myers when I was about a year old. So I've grown up in Lee County my whole life, stayed here to go to college, went to Florida Gulf Coast. That's where my wife and I met. We've been married now 13 years, and we've got a little girl who just started 5th grade.
That's so awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So Matt, I want to ask you something. In your several terms as State House Rep, what has been your biggest accomplishment?
Well, we've tackled a lot of really challenging issues. You know, the big reason I ran for office originally was to deal with natural resource questions. So the Caloosahatchee River flows through my district, the Everglades, and those perennial questions were really a big topic, and something I'd already been involved in on a volunteer basis before I ever ran for office. And so as a result, I focused on that, and I had the chance to carry 3 different major Everglades legislation over the last 8 years.
And what did that legislation encompass?
Yeah, so one of them set up the permanent tax that the farm area south of the lake pays. There's a lot of misinformation about how the Everglades works, but the farm area south of the lake is the actual only property owners that pay 2 taxes to the Water Management District. They pay the millage that all the residents, all the homeowners pay, and then they pay a separate tax, and this bill made that permanent, specifically to construct and maintain the stormwater treatment. So all of the water that comes off the farm fields gets treated before it goes into the Everglades National Park. That was one of them. The other ones dealt with the long-term strategy, as it was called. We could take a whole hour just to talk about all of these pieces, but essentially all of the construction projects south of the Everglades agricultural area going towards US 41 that need to be built, making sure those are actually finally being built after 30 years of delay. And then the Legacy Florida bill that dedicates now $200 million a year from the conservation spending money to build the projects. And that's really the simple answer. People ask, how do we solve the problem we're dealing with down here? And it's build the projects. There's 68 projects that were designed and approved in 1999. We're going to have built nearly a dozen of them within short order, but we had not finished a single one of them by the time I was elected.
Yeah, that doesn't seem right. So the state legislature came up with an agreement, what we think can work to benefit our state, and nothing actually happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a pretty typical government story. We had a flood in 1947 that was enormous. It had about 8 feet of water for the people that live in Davie, or if you've ever been to the Sawgrass Mall in Broward County, Miami Lakes, where the Dolphin Stadium is. That was 6 to 8 feet deep in water. And we asked the Corps of Engineers to build a project to make sure that never happened again. And they did. And the solution was to dump the water east and west out of Lake Okeechobee before it ever got into Dade and Broward County in the first place. And so what people really don't understand is most of Dade and Broward west of 95 is like New Orleans. If it wasn't for the flood control protection system, all of it would be underwater most years. So we've got a lot of restoration. Yep.
And it needs it. And I want to let the viewers know how important this is to Floridians, because we have a beautiful state, and we do have projects, as you said, developed that we want to put forward. We want to make it happen. And in this way, we're keeping, the state of Florida and Floridians safe. And I absolutely love it. I'm very pro-environment, and I just want to thank you for leading those efforts.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, moving on to your campaign for agricultural commissioner, you're sort of explaining it already, but tell me, why is it that you want to now be the agricultural commissioner of Florida?
Well, the responsibilities of the office are really diverse, and it handles the issues that I'm passionate about. Obviously, we've talked already about water and the environment. The Office of Water Policy is housed at the Department of Agriculture, so not just environmental questions, but what's the long-term strategy for a state that has 21 million people, and we're going to grow towards 30 million people, and how do you address water quality long-term with that growth, but also the fundamentals, water supply, so that we can continue to be successful in that growth. And where we don't want to end up is like California. California has done it all wrong. They have not planned for their future. They've mismanaged the resource. The farmer community has been cut out of the water supply question there. And it's now basically a death struggle between environmentalists and urban users. And that's just a totally unhealthy scenario. We don't want to be there. And we don't have to. We've got an abundant supply. And if we invest in infrastructure for the urban sector, reservoirs, reuse, desalination plants for the urban areas that are along the coast, but you get the urban use off of the aquifer, and then you'll have plenty left over for our springs, our lakes, our rivers, and for the rural users, for the farmers and the small rural communities that can't afford to build big infrastructure projects. But the state should be leader on that, and you're going to see me advocate that strongly. Now, the office itself, just agriculture alone, it's really an incredible responsibility. We're totally unique from the rest of the country. The other 47 of the lower 48, they traditionally depend on us for all of their food in January, February, March, and April. Until the thaw happens north of us, we're the only state that's growing food for the rest of the country. And as a result, we're very diverse. It really is. It really is.
Can I ask you something, Matt?
Yes.
I don't mean to interrupt you. What's the percentage of farmland in the state of Florida?
So farmland still accounts for about a third of the state, between citrus, cattle, forestry. We really are a major producer of forest products as well. It's mostly north of Gainesville, but we're a major part of that in the timber industry as well. But that's really what's so unique about this state. You look at Iowa, for example. The ag commissioner there has to worry about pigs and corn and soybeans. That's pretty much it. In Florida, we have 4 different soil types. You've got clay in the north, you've got sand in the middle, you've got muck around the lake, and then in Homestead, that's actually ground up coral rock. So you got 4 different soil types. You've got a diversity of climate zones. We have 300 different commodities that we grow here in Florida, from tropical fruits and vegetables in the south end, and up in the north end you've got tobacco and cotton and corn and peanuts, and so the commissioner has a very huge responsibility just to keep track of how to support all of those different industries, as diverse it is. But then it's all the other jobs that it oversees. The governor's office has really morphed to be very focused on healthcare and education, which makes sense. The state budget, about 70% of the budget is just healthcare and education. But as a result, the commissioner's office has overtaken most of the day-to-day job regulations. So oil changes, auto repair, security guards, pest control, irrigation. They have county fairs for ride safety, make sure the Ferris wheel doesn't fall apart. And then as a result, they gave amusement parks to the commissioner's office. So Disney and Universal
take on a big load.
It's a huge load.
Right.
Well, and it's all the small businesses in the state. So you want to have somebody that really understands small business, understands how they need to be treated. And I think you're going to see that commitment from me without a doubt.
That sounds awesome. Okay, so I want to turn this around now to the Second Amendment topic, which is a focus here In the Crosshairs. I want to know, first I'd like to just have your general opinion as to the Second Amendment.
Sure, that one's easy. So anybody that understands history needs to understand, and does understand, the First, Second, and Third Amendment, particularly in context. They are a direct result of the experience the colonists had with King George and the things he was trying to do to them. He was preventing them from speaking freely in the public square. He was preventing them from worshiping at anywhere other than the approved church. He was restricting their ability to own firearms and weapons. The Third Amendment's a great example, and this is really the one I love to use on people who say, well, the First and the Second, they couldn't have imagined what we have today. Well, so the Third Amendment says that you can't be forced to have soldiers housed in your home without your permission and outside of times of war. That is what the king was doing. He was putting soldiers in people's homes so that they couldn't be rebellious, so they couldn't speak freely, and they couldn't do what they wanted to do, which was speak out for their rights. When you understand that, there's no exceptions.
That's pure tyranny.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's what I ask people who say, well, there should be exceptions to the Second Amendment. Well, what about the Third? Is it okay if soldiers come and stay in your guest house? I mean, it's
Sometimes.
not in your house. Yeah, sometimes. What if one day a week? And nobody would put up with that. And that's really, I think that helps explain my view, and I think it's the correct view of the Second Amendment. It's unequivocal. We have the right to defend ourselves, and because those rights come from our Creator. I mean, that is the fundamental premise of the Declaration of the Constitution, that our Creator gives us our rights. No king, no government, no politician gives them to us. They can't take them away from us. They have to respect the reality, which is I have reserved those to myself and have not given them away to either the federal or state government. And it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, the idea of natural rights. It's a natural right to defend yourself. And if it doesn't necessarily have to be a firearm, but the idea is that you could defend yourself with some type of weapon. And that weapon could be the chair you're sitting on, right? Right? That becomes a weapon. So we're not going to take away chairs from people. We always have a natural right, and it's really self-preservation. We have a natural right to defend ourselves. Someone's going to try to attack me. They're going to try to take my freedom away from me. I'm going to defend myself. That's the way I look at it, Matt. Absolutely. Okay, so now we have an incident that happened earlier this year, a very unfortunate school shooting in Florida, in Parkland High School in Broward County. And I want to know what was going on in the state house, because Florida, because the state legislature and the governor signed into law, a gun control law almost immediately after that school shooting. I want to know what was happening in the state house, and was there any convincing of kind of like, our adversaries who may disagree with us? Was there any convincing them that, these gun control laws, all they do is penalize gun owners, law-abiding gun owners? I haven't done anything wrong. Why are you giving me new laws on how I can use my firearm? I haven't shot up the school. I haven't done anything wrong. Why am I being penalized? And I want to know what was happening in the state house as far as that argument is concerned.
Sure. And look, what happened at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School was a tragedy. The tragedy actually was more that it was totally preventable. Before we even talk about the state house, you look at what we've learned about the situation there, how the superintendent enacted a program that ignored the escalation in violence in the student population in order to score higher on violence reduction, how the sheriff was complicit in that. How they ignored, and even in the response, we've seen that with what we've learned about the deputy and how he failed to respond. Direct contravention to the current operation protocols for a school shooter. You have to engage the individual. It's not a siege where you're going to negotiate by phone like some old movie. You got an individual who these folks are like, they're lone wolf terrorists. Their motivation may not be religious or civic unrest. It's their warped sense of reality. But you're not going to bog down in some negotiation over a telephone. They're intent on killing people, and you have to respond. And that's the call that's asked of you now. In the state house.
Can I clarify something just for the listeners? When you talked about the county, the way they were ignoring certain actions by the kids, this occurred during the Obama administration, and several other counties across the state have also instituted this, and it was an idea that to reduce, putting kind of kids in jail, right? So the idea is to reduce the amount of kids that we're, incarcerating, but instead of, actually wanting to prevent that from happening, it just created a situation where the people in charge were just sort of, turning a blind eye. Because those numbers that were coming in about, criminal activity in the schools, they were getting less funding from the Obama administration. So if they were showing a reduction in in kids being incarcerated, they were going to be getting federal funding. So just to let everybody know how this ties in and how this is wrong, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
If there's criminal activity inside a school, well, you're going to have to hold them accountable, and you're going to have to hold them accountable right now, right? We're not going to wait till tomorrow, next week, next month. We have to hold people accountable for their actions because A, it prevents them from doing it again, and also the other people around them. If you watch somebody get away with criminal activity,
Yep.
what makes you not want to do it yourself?
It's broken windows theory. Yeah.
Two deterrents here, that goes on. But thank you. I just wanted to explain that.
No, and before we leave this point, it really is a serious issue. And look, this conversation comes up a lot. All of us in our youth probably did things that, we're lucky we didn't get caught. We were being rebellious, being young people. But, there's a difference. And unfortunately, the common theme that you see, particularly in school shooters, particularly in folks that end up in a life of crime, they do not have, the boys particularly, don't have a father figure. And that's a real dividing line. When you look at the statistics of who ends up in prison, who ends up committing crimes, the two most common factors are, did you or did you not have a father in your life? And did you or did you not finish high school? If you did not finish high school and you did not have a dad, there is almost a 90% chance you're going to end up in prison. And that's really those two things alone. And then you look on the other side that in America, regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of anything, if you have a two-parent household that's married and they have a job, you are more than 90% likely to be successful in life. It is really just that simple. And that's why you hear us talk about a great deal in Tallahassee about making sure kids finish school, holding the school system accountable to make sure they finish. And then you hear the governor focused overwhelmingly on jobs, 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 because those are the things that from a state policymaker we can control that really make a difference in people's lives. But your original question was, what happened in the State House? How did we deal with the response to this? And I voted no. I voted no on the bill because the so-called solution presented did not have anything to do with what happened in Parkland. Raising the age to purchase a firearm to 21 years old would not have had any impact on this situation. Banning you from buying certain types of weapons isn't going to have an impact in the situation. What happened here was an individual was ignored who clearly had serious mental illness and criminal behavior. And that's the side we should be addressing. That's the side I very much wanted to help support. And, unfortunately, when you get a tragedy like this, you've got a group of folks in Tallahassee. The Democratic Party is 100% opposed to our understanding of the Second Amendment, the understanding we just discussed a minute ago. They do not view it that way. They will say so. Their members do overwhelmingly from the floor. We had a bill I want to say the day or 2 days after we were on the floor of the House, and one of the members moved to bring a bill up that was a complete, what they called assault weapons ban, but when you actually read the definition, it banned basically everything except shotguns. And
they just can't do that.
No, they can't do that. They didn't even understand what their own bill did, and of course, it was all for show. We have a process.
Shall not be infringed.
There you go.
I'm gonna
It's
put it
so
like
simple.
letters on a big poster.
It is so simple, but some people just don't get it. But it was just completely for show. It was so disappointing. This is a bill that never got heard in a committee because we weren't going to move it. It was a weapon. It was a gun ban, and we don't bring bills up that don't make it through committee. If you can't get through the process, you don't go to the floor. So they did it completely for show. They had students in the gallery. They preyed on their emotions and had the cameras trained on them to see them crying to try to drive the emotional reaction. It really was actually pretty twisted and disappointing.
Yeah, it sounds disappointing. I mean, it's seeking that emotional reaction and then operating by it. I can understand an emotional reaction. That's not my problem. But you don't take that reaction and create law based upon it. You take a step back. You look at the big picture and you calm down a little bit. It's the only way, because you're not really thinking logically when you're thinking emotionally. Mm-hmm. It's really the bottom line. Yeah, that would have freaked me out. I was at home and I was like, biting my nails. But please don't do it. And that bump stock, it absolutely makes no technical sense. The banning the bump stock, there's absolutely no technical sense. This is the other thing I don't understand. If state legislatures want to create laws to make us safe, let's just say that. Maybe they really want to keep us safe. Wouldn't it be prudent to have organizations that actually know what they're talking about when it comes to firearms? Like somebody from the NRA, somebody from the Florida Carry, somebody who knows something, with authority, that can talk with authority on guns, who can come into the state legislature, address the state legislature in a logical way, but they're not listening. They're like, we don't want to hear logic. I don't get it. It's so frustrating.
Well, it's a frustrating part of the legislative process, sure enough, and it really is. For a lot of the folks that weigh in on this issue, they don't own firearms. They've never shot a firearm. It's like having somebody that's never driven a car try to come in and make motor vehicle law. It's just you're so disconnected from the reality of how that experience works that you really can't be objective on how to talk about the issue in the first place.
Yes, indeed. And I want to share with everyone, if the idea is, if you don't want to have a gun, that's okay with me. I'm not going to force you, to have a gun. That's your choice. You can defend yourself with something else. That's quite all right with me. I don't have a problem with that. But why do they want to take that right away from me? So now I have a choice. I can choose to defend myself with a firearm. I could choose to defend myself with a baseball bat. I can choose to defend myself with whatever means I want to. I lost you for a second. There, you're back.
Yep.
So I tend to think, and I want your opinion on this, I tend to think that this is something a little bit more orchestrated from powers a little bit bigger that really want, gun confiscation. And at the end of the day, the only reason to confiscate firearms from a populace is to control them.
Yep.
Because it's really, Matt, right? There's no other reason, right? There's no other reason to disarm a populace unless you plan on controlling them.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be controlled by my government.
Yeah.
But in any event, I think power is a lot bigger than we see. Do you agree?
Well, I think the average legislator, the average politician, they don't see it that way. They think that they're, doing the work that their constituents want. They feel an emotional tug and they react emotionally. And they're not paying attention to the bigger picture. There are people who very much understand the power play involved in this. I mean, there's no question why when despots take over their country, everybody's heard the Hitler example, but the same thing happened in Cuba when Castro took over. You saw it in the Soviet Union. You saw it in Cambodia and other places like that. You take away the arms. And that's why, when you asked me earlier, what's my understanding of the Second Amendment? And I talked about the experience of the colonists. They drew up this document based on what they had experienced with the king. And the king was trying to disarm them, to keep them from speaking out and pushing back against his tyranny, because he understood what you just said. If the population is unarmed, they can't resist you. And that is why that right is guaranteed. I have zero interest in having to be part of a revolution, and I have zero interest. We talk about in self-defense, being able to carry in all situations. I don't want my wife, who's a teacher, to have to get into some kind of shootout with a school shooter. But what we know for certain is, on the other end, if people are unarmed, tyrannies and despots will try to take over. And if people are unarmed, like they are at schools, which have a big sign on the door that says no one here can defend themselves, then they will become targets. And that is what happens. Regardless of the good intentions of my colleagues in the legislature and politicians around the country and the state, they miss the bigger picture of what the purpose of the Second Amendment is and why it is so critical that we're able to defend ourselves and have that God-given right protected.
They also miss, it's not just about the despotic government, which is a very important part of it all. So in the event our government becomes despotic, we should be able to, defend ourselves. But it's also just even the common criminal, right? So just think back, in the colonist days. So that, they took their horse and their buggy and their carriage, and they traveled because they wanted to go visit mom. 100 miles away. It's going to take them 3 days to get there and so on. And now you're traveling and there's robbers, there's rapists, there's murderers. I don't like it. I don't want people to do those terrible things, but they do. But they do.
That's
so,
exactly right.
Yeah, so, I want to be able to defend myself. And if you don't want to, that's okay. But guess what? Even if I'm not armed and I'm out in the public, in a public place with a lot of people, even if I'm not armed, I live in the state of Florida. I could be confident that potentially half of those people are armed. Half of them are potentially armed. And you know what? I feel good. I feel safe, because if some crazy person decides they want to shoot up wherever it is I am, I'm pretty confident that somebody there is armed.
Yeah. Well, and that's really the contrast is so stark, because the reason it's shocking when something happens in Florida is exactly because of that reality. because we don't have crime running through the streets every day, because the people know that Floridians protect themselves. You compare your experience every day in Florida to what happens in Chicago or Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia. And you know, Chicago has just become an absolute train wreck of a disaster. Somewhere on the average of 100 people a weekend are being killed in gun violence in Chicago. And they have the strongest gun laws in America to protect their people. Meanwhile, their people are absolutely being murdered left and right because they aren't able to actually protect themselves. And you know, what's crazy about it is it almost is expected. Nobody pays attention and really reports on that daily tragedy in Chicago. But when we do have a very out of the ordinary event in Florida, it just captures the news media and becomes their focus, when the reality of everyday life for most Floridians is we've got the lowest crime rate in over 45 years because we're committed to the rule of law and we're committed to maintaining our right of self-defense.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's absolutely right. I love Florida. I'm a New Yorker originally, but I've been down here, Matt, with my husband and our two small kids. We've been down here for 6 years. And when I first came here, I was like, I want to go home. 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 I was, oh my God, the Floridians, they don't like me. I'm too loud. I swear. You know, they look at me and they're like, oh. You know, so I've calmed down. I say things like, have a nice day. And I really love it. I really love it down here.
It's a different pace of life. Yeah, it's definitely a different pace of life than New York. There's no question about it.
I absolutely love it. Okay, I have a question for you that one of my friends asked me to ask you. Mm-hmm. One of my friends, Glenn Jabelina, he's the founder of a group called Why Dads Matter, which is part of what you talked about earlier. And it is an effort to keep dads in their children's lives. And I'm a volunteer for his group. He's absolutely fantastic. Advocate in Sarasota, which is where he's from. So anyway, he asked me to ask you, what is your position on industrial hemp?
Okay, so industrial hemp is, for the viewers' sake, is a very similar to cannabis, to marijuana, but it doesn't actually have any of the cannabidiol compounds. So, you know, you can smoke it all day, but it's not going to do anything any more than bamboo would. What it is a really great fiber. And historically, over the centuries, we've used it for fiber production, for ropes, for sailcloth, for things that need a very dense but solid fiber that can be used to make industrial products. It was banned along with marijuana back in the last century because it looks basically the same. They're brothers basically in terms of plant culture. But we have pushed forward in Florida. We now have, because of bills that I helped support and oversaw as the chair, we have the industrial hemp trials going on right now at University of Florida and Florida A&M University, and they're studying two things, and principally one. You know, the first one is, you know, making sure we have good strategies for enforceability. You're not allowed to grow marijuana, obviously. So how does law enforcement get the training to understand how to differentiate what's being grown as an industrial crop, and make sure they don't get mistakes? That's a pretty simple. I mean, that's really just training. And coming up with training protocols. The other one is the invasive quality. As we talked about, Florida is different than the other 47, lower 48. We don't have a regular freeze that you can be guaranteed to have every year. And so whether you're talking about Melaleuca or bamboo, or in this case, hemp, studying what your methodologies are as a farmer to make sure it doesn't become invasive, that it doesn't get off your farm, get out into the woods, and then crowd out all the other plants that we have in our parks and our forests. I think we will be successful in it. You've seen a commitment from the legislature to move forward on this. I certainly support it. And I think that research should be wrapped up in short order here in the next couple of years. That'll have the standard protocols so that all farmers who want to do it will have a handbook to say, here's how you manage the crop so that it can be a successful crop for you and not get off your farm and become an invasive weed, essentially, in your neighbor's farm.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. That's fantastic. I'm sure my friend's going to like your answer. Just saying. I wanted to go back and just mention, you talked a little bit about the idea that our schools, aren't, we don't have anybody armed in the schools, and the idea of the gun-free zones not keeping us safe. I just wanted to mention that that's not something, that's an opinion. It's something that's been proven in case after case after case, including that the United Nations have also determined that gun-free zones do not save lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's
exactly
a misnomer. Somehow people think that gun-free zones somehow save lives, when in reality they do not. And I would say the majority of shootings, of the mass shootings, it may even be all of them, I don't know for sure, but it is absolutely, the majority of the shootings are done by in gun-free zones.
Yes. Well, the what's the old Mark Twain quote? There's lies, damn lies, and then statistics. Statistics can be manipulated. So a mass shooting, this is the key question. If you have gang violence, for example, in Chicago, and somebody sprays the rival gang with a semi-auto and kills 6 or 7 people, is that a mass shooting that should be included in the statistics versus what we all think of when we say mass shooting? Someone who's planning to attack innocent people who had no relation, basically, to the shooter, and they target a church, a school, wherever. And if you define it as all of us, as a regular people would define it, then it's somewhere in the order of 95 to 98% of mass shootings happen in gun-free zones.
Wow.
And that's logical. These people who want to become famous through their carnage pick areas where they know people cannot defend themselves, and we basically make our children, our families, sitting ducks by having these signs on the door that says, no one here can defend themselves. So if you're planning to attack people, this is a great spot to do it.
I'm glad you used the word sitting ducks. I like to use that word too, that phrase too, because that's exactly what they are. And I want everyone to just consider for one moment. Say you had a single mom in a inner city. Let's give Chicago for an example. She's got a couple of kids. She's home alone, at night with her children. And yeah, she's got locks on the doors and all that. And she comes home, she locks her doors. She thinks she's safe. She can't get a firearm, by the way. She can't even apply for one. You have to jump, it's basically a crime to have a firearm. And if you want one, you got to jump through a ton of hurdles that most people can't jump through. So there she is. And you know what she is? She's a sitting duck, period. So any burglar, any thug, any criminal can go ahead and go into her home, and she will have absolutely no defense at all. Because we know, and this is not something that's an opinion, particularly when it comes to females. Men are just traditionally larger and stronger, period. Good, bad, or ugly, whatever you feel about it, it's okay. It doesn't matter, but it's the truth. So as a woman, I know that I can't put up a fight with a man. I just can't. I don't have the physicality for it. But my gun can.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. Well, there's nothing more to add to that one. That one's spot on.
Okay, we are definitely coming down to the close to the end of the show. I appreciate you coming on so much, Matt. This has been so interesting. I want you to give us your well, first of all, I want to tell everybody that you have a primary race coming up.
Yes,
and that's going to be at the end of the month.
Yeah, August 28th.
August 28th. So you are a Republican running in a Republican primary. So you'll have to win the primary to move on to the general election.
Correct.
how are things going? Do you think you're gonna take it
Well,
over?
I think we've definitely objectively worked the hardest. As I said, we've gone over 82,000 miles, been on the road for 15 months, and you can see the support. We're the only statewide candidate that's endorsed by the NRA.
Nice.
We've had an A rating or better all 8 years. I'm the only candidate that can say that, by the way, in my service in the legislature, that I was consistently A rated the whole time. And we've got great support across the state. Senator Marco Rubio's endorsed us. Congressman Matt Gaetz has endorsed us.
Okay.
We've got folks really in every single county, House members, Senate members, sheriffs, constitutional officers, local elected officials, people who recognize the things that you and I have been talking about here today, that they are critically important to Florida's future, that whoever the next ag commissioner is going to have to tackle and stand up for these issues. And I've got a proven record of doing that. And I'm very, very excited by the prospect of being able to continue to carry on the things that I think are important for all Floridians.
Excellent. So when you get elected into office, I'm going to be coming and visiting you with my problems, with my issues.
Glad to work on them. Absolutely.
Excellent. I appreciate that. So I want to go ahead and let you have the last word then again, Matt, if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. As we've talked about today, this job really boils down to three things. It's jobs, it's water, and it's the Second Amendment. And I've got a proven record on all three. I think we're ready to serve on day one and tackle those issues. People can find more out about us. They can go to the website, votecaldwell.org, votecaldwell.org. They can read about all the issues, read our record, see who's supporting us. And then if they want to travel along in social media, they can get on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. They can go to the hashtag 2-Lane Travels with the number 2-Lane Travels. And they'll see pictures from almost every single day of those 80,000+ miles as we've traveled around the state. And really been a great experience. I've loved being out there campaigning and just excited for what the next 2 weeks are going to bring on the primary trail.
Excellent. I wish you the best of luck. God bless you. Appreciate your service. Thanks so much for coming on my show. It's been great.
Glad to do it.
And you'll have to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. We will do it.
Okay. Excellent. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. That was absolutely great. I have like, I'm like, it's good for me because you're an elected official, and yeah, so it's good for me. So I've been like talking about you since I booked you yesterday. I've been telling everybody, Matt Caldwell is coming on my show. I've been super excited about it. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll submit a 200-word article with the video. So that'll get posted at TLBTV with the video. They do the TLBTV. They do a great job. They do a really good job with the production of it. I'm really happy with them. And then it'll air. It'll post next Wednesday. At least it'll be like 6 days before the primary. Sure. So once it posts, I'll absolutely get it around on Facebook.
Perfect.
I'll push it quickly because I know you have a little deadline going on.
Yeah.
So I'm going to push that out really quickly, and I'll send Kyle the link to the show as soon as it's up. And that's about it. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. You enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Matt. You got my vote.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Be well.
Bye-bye.